Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Fan Behavior and F1 Podcast. I am Zoe, and today I am not joined by Hannah, but I am joined by, I think I can now say, a good friend in Freya from the Lakeside Drive Podcast. Freya, thank you for being on Fan Behavior.
You are very welcome and absolutely good friend, my friend and yours. After living through IndyCar together,
I know.
100% we can say that.
Yeah. So for those who don't know, we met at IndyCar my time's getting all confused. It was early August, right?
I've decided the time doesn't exist. It hasn't existed for like 5 years.
No, it hasn't. And yeah, I feel like we had an interesting dinner where we first met, where we had some, interesting interactions, not between us, but with other people. And I feel like that just bonded all of us for life. We went through that experience.
Totally. A mutual kind of distaste for other people, I think,
Exactly.
can often really bond people together. So that's going to be my most diplomatic way of saying
Exactly. It was quite the evening. But so we have so much to get into. Obviously, this is the Singapore GP recap. We miss Hannah very much. She is busy on maid of honor duties at a wedding for the next week or so. But I did want to just quickly, before we get into all the race stuff, because you have a podcast and it's a motorsport. Like, do you just focus on F1 or is it motorsport in general?
Yeah, so we are a Formula One podcast,
okay,
but every now and then we branch out, and that's
right.
a combination of when opportunity arises, and it's also, we all have our own little passions in terms of all of the little intricacies within F1 and motorsport, generally speaking. So, James, one of my hosts, is really into wine, and so he's done collaborations with some of the wine businesses who are involved in Formula One and that type of thing. So he's done a few kind of spin-off episodes in that way. And I'm a psychologist by trade, so I love all of the kind of sports psychology side of things. So I tend to do spin-off episodes in that way. So we allow our kind of individual kind of passions and interests to have their moment as well. But at the heart of it, we are a Formula One podcast.
Yes. I love that so much. Yeah, you just had a psychologist. Didn't you just have somebody on that you did like a deep dive into the psychology of F1 drivers and stuff?
Yeah, he was brilliant. So his name is Dr. Ken Carter. Also, what a time to be called Ken, but anyway.
Yes.
And his specialty is the psychology of thrill seeking. So that element of our personality, which drives us to kind of crave those, what you kind of colloquially know as like a high adrenaline experience, or kind of sensation seeking.
Yeah.
And so we talked about neurological processes and neurotransmitters and hormones and all sorts of things that actually result in even things like being able to focus more under pressure because of this combination of dopamine and cortisol. And so, yeah, if you're interested in that question of when every bone in your body is telling you to brake, how do you not brake?
Yes.
We deep dive into that type of thing. So that was a great episode. My nerd psychology side was buzzing.
I love that. That's so, I feel like people don't, like, that's an area people haven't gone into really, like, in the F1 world. And it's obviously like there's a common thread between all these drivers. Like, they all have something inside their brains that makes them want to go very fast.
Yes, indeed. and won't be satisfied unless they're doing something like that. So,
exactly.
Yeah, if you want to hear more about that, I won't talk about it now because it's a whole nother episode. But if you're interested, yeah, that was a really fun and interesting chat, but it's not too academic or anything. He's really relatable. He was really engaging, and he's done tests with a bunch of IndyCar drivers and things like that. So that was really interesting if people are interested.
I love that. Yeah, everyone should go check out your podcast for sure. Okay, let's get into the race weekend because there is so much to cover, so much that happened. I mean, we'll get into this, but like, this is the first non-Red Bull victory. Like, this is a big weekend for F1 as a whole. I honestly can't believe it. It kind of hasn't sunk in yet.
It just felt very kind of this glitch in the universe.
Yes.
I don't know. And even at the end when we had the glorious Spanish anthem playing in our Discord with our podcast, we had people saying, what is this music? I have never heard it before.
Right.
I feel like there's been some sort of like protocol
Yes.
mistake or something.
Yes.
It's a really unfamiliar feeling now. We've just got so accustomed to the domination from that team. But my goodness, to finish under really racy conditions,
Yes.
just it was one of those races and weekends as a whole that really makes you remember how much and why you love this sport.
I completely agree. We'll get into all of it. First things first, ahead of the weekend, Zhou re-signed with Alpha for 2024. How do you feel about that re-signing? Were you surprised, not surprised? What were your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I wasn't surprised. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago on LSD, but it was I think Alfa Romeo as a whole is in a bit of a funny place at the moment, waiting for the whole Audi situation to eventuate. And I think it's just going to be a couple of years of kind of holding patterns, really. I think they're not going to want to mess too much with, you know, toying with new drivers and things like that. I think they're just going to be in a bit of a holding pattern. So to keep things as consistent as they can, it doesn't make sense for them right now to invest huge amounts in a, you know, kind of marquee driver type of appointment. I don't think that would make financial sense for them or business sense for them. I think we're going to see a couple of years of potentially nothing grand really coming from that team, because they've just got such a massive change and shift coming in. So yeah, I think he's done enough to show that he deserves a seat on the grid. Is he one of the best drivers out there? No. Is he going to be? Probably not. But he certainly hasn't driven in such a way that I think really makes you question his deserving of a place.
Yes, I completely agree. I think because they've just been bad as a team, Valtteri's not been that great. It's not like this. It's not like an Alex Albon, Logan Sargent situation where Alex is continually getting points every weekend and Logan is not. And it's such a drastic difference. It's like they're both not doing so well. So then you just kind of forget about the fact that maybe he actually isn't that great of a driver. Like, I don't think he's bad. But I don't know that he's like, I don't think he's going to move up in terms of like a better race seat or anything like that. Did you hear the rumors that they wanted to get Nico Hülkenberg?
Yeah. And look, again, if you look at what they need,
right,
it's sturdy, it's reliable, it's consistent. And those are things that we see from Hülkenberg, right? The fact that he just came in and performed as he did. And K-Mag is not dissimilar in a lot of ways. It's this, for a team who's in kind of in flux in the way that Alfa Romeo are at the moment, I think what they are looking for in the variables that they can control, because there's so much that you can't in this sport, is going, okay, well, let's just make sure we don't have an inconsistent, unpredictable driver at the helm. So I think that would make sense for them. But Hulk seems pretty happy at Haas, to be entirely honest. I mean, obviously that's all sorted now, but it's I didn't see him leaving. He seems to be having a good time.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think they're probably thinking ahead with the Audi connection, German brand, German driver.
Yeah.
It's a little bit, I feel like Haas has I don't see a path forward for Haas. Like, I don't, with Audi at least coming in, you can say, well, there's a chance that they could make leaps and bounds. I don't know that we are anticipating Haas being like a great team in the immediate future. So part of me is a little bit surprised, but also I feel like Nico's just like happy where he is, and Haas is better than Alpha currently. So he probably feels like I could get that Alpha seat down the road if I really wanted it.
I don't think that's set like that. I think that seat when it comes to Audi, when it comes in, will very much be up for grabs. Obviously, there's going to be some preferences, perhaps with nationality, as we do see, that alignment just makes sense for them from a sponsorship perspective, and for their fan base. So, and obviously commercially. So that would make sense for them if they could get a German driver. But at the same time, I think that seat is so up for grabs when it does become available. And like you said, Hülkenberg, I think at this point in his career, you go, look, maybe it's just the better the devil, and sticking at Haas. The challenge with Haas in terms of, and I agree, I don't think we're going to see them suddenly make big steps, but they're not a they buy all their parts, right? So they're not a manufacturer. So the thing which would make them completely change their game is if they paired with someone like an Andretti, for example, and say, we're going to have these partnerships, and they're not just buying all of their parts and relying on their Ferrari engine. So I think that is the only thing that would really see them totally change their standing in the constructors in particular.
I agree. Yeah, so as of right now, we have not seen any changes to the driver lineup for next year, though I am pretty certain that will change, and we'll get to that later. Shifting to sort of like practice and the storylines that were forming because of practice. Obviously, like Red Bull right out of the gate, people were like, oh shit, like they're not P1, P2 at the end of practice at a, FP1. Then it was FP2, and it was the same thing. And it was like, is this real, or are we being gaslit? And then, it kind of kept building throughout the weekend. Like, are they really not good this weekend? Are they really not good this weekend? And then we get to qualifying, and they were really not good. Were you surprised? Like, obviously practice, you can't read like a ton into the results of practice, but once it got to qualifying, were you shocked at how poorly that they were performing?
I think we are just so used to Red Bull, even if they have a poor practice, whether it's P1, P2, whatever, they just seem to bring it together. Or even if, Max might be sitting in kind of P3 in qualifying, all of a sudden he finds it. Or he finds it.
Yeah.
So I think we did all think that was going to happen. I was definitely surprised that they were as bad as they were. I was worried for them just after the comments that they were making after free practice. They weren't as confident as they usually are in terms of saying, we'll find it. We've got a bit of work to do overnight, but we'll get there. And I think what is really challenging is when you are faced with a problem like that and you just can't find the solution, you tend to just throw the kitchen sink at it.
Yeah.
Which then, you're making all of these different changes with all of these different variables, which then makes it even more confusing to figure out what's working and what's not. And I know there were some hypotheses around, the weather in Singapore, for example, in terms of humidity and damp air and how that affects downforce in comparison to a dry air and that type of thing. But then Miami, so
right.
I don't think it's quite as simple as that. I think another hypothesis around that is, of course, the technical directive around flexi wings, which, of course, Christian Horner had said, no, that doesn't affect us and that's not an issue. So, of course, he's going to say that. But, I think it's, people just look to one change and then they look at different effects, and that's the most obvious connection with such a change. But I was certainly surprised that they were as bad as they were.
I mean, it was genuinely, it's like, okay, it's not incredibly shocking. It's not shocking, I should say, to see Checo out in Q2. Like, we've seen that many times this season because he's made a mistake, and he did make a mistake in Q2, but for Max to not get through purely because he just didn't have the pace to get through, like, that was what was. And then the fact that Liam Lawson,
I know.
It was so incredible. I was just so shocked. And obviously, like, we'll get to Liam. We'll have to do a whole deep dive on just the whole Alpha Tauri situation as a whole, because that's a conundrum. But it was, I have to admit, it was really exciting going into Q3 and being like, I don't know who's going to get on pole. I don't know who's going to finish in the top 5. Like, just that uncertainty is really nice, because we've had so many races of just everything being, for the most part, at least in terms of pole position, the winner pretty set in stone.
Yep. Oh, totally. It's so much more exciting. And knowing as well here how much your grid position affects the outcome of the race, right? So it's not like a easy overtake track where Max might be in 8th, but don't worry, he'll be in a backup in P1 by lap 15. It's not one of those tracks. So I think that added jeopardy of how much of an impact your grid position affects the outcome of the race, that added to that excitement. And I just loved it. Qualifying was fantastic.
It was so good. Something that wasn't so good in qualifying was Lance's crash. I don't know what you watch, what stream you watch, but we get the Sky Sports coverage and they were on board with Lance when he crashed. Yeah. And that was like, I almost like laughed because it was like so shocking, but then to see what had happened to his car, like just completely destroyed. I don't know. Lance has been having so many issues, and we've talked about this on the podcast, like pretty much every week, about just his performance this season. And like that just, I mean, it does not help his case at all.
It doesn't. I think, look, I try and be as objective as I can when I look at Lance Stroll, because I think it's so easy to make a judgment on him based on how he comes across, which I think it affects how we feel about him so much.
Sure.
He has this perception of kind of apathy, which Mike Crack has said a million times, he works really hard and this, that, and the other. And I completely believe that. I really, really do. I think the challenge is how his perception is his own worst enemy. So with that in mind, I kind of step back and just go, let's look at the results. And in fact, let's not just look at the results. Let's look at your lap times and that type of thing, because I think performance, the results don't always paint a true picture as to how things are going, right? And there's a bit of a kind of 3/10 rule of thumb when it comes to relative difference between two drivers. And the challenge, if you look at Stroll's performance in comparison to Fernando, is that he's at the very bottom end of that 3/10 rule of thumb in terms of his lap time. And that's looking at kind of the more, I suppose, predictable races. We take out the ones where it was really wet or whatever, and you look at the races that were dry, which ran kind of according to regulation and those types of things. And his lap time is at the very bottom end of that. And that's where you have to go objectively, is that you can't look away anymore. And I think he's had some bad luck. He had some reliability issues which don't seem to have affected Nando. And I think it's really important to acknowledge all of those. And again, that's why I don't just look at results on paper, because it doesn't show the retirements or whatever else that were completely outside of his control. But it's not enough to explain that kind of consistent disparity. And ultimately, I think it comes down to this, which is that Stroll is fine. He's fine, but you can't be fine, like competent, when you were racing alongside the likes of Fernando Alonso. And the problem at the moment for Aston Martin is that they should be second in the constructors, and instead they're now in fourth. And that comes down to his performance in the season so far.
I completely agree. I think, what I've said is I don't think Lance is a bad driver. I think there have been quote unquote paid drivers in the past, in the very recent past, who were not good. Lance is at least, he is a decent Formula One driver, but my biggest issue is especially recently with some of the comments that Mike has made, like basically being like, everything's fine. Lance is right there with him. And it's like, but he's not.
But he's not.
but yeah. And like, we're not stupid. And that's one of the issues I have in F1 is like this sort of, people not saying what we can see is true. And that's frustrating for me. And also the other thing that's frustrating is like, and I compare it to what happened last year with Daniel and Lando. It's like Lando was much faster than Daniel. Daniel was not doing well. Daniel gets fired because of that. But like, then you have a guy with Lance in his situation where that's not going to happen. And that's just like frustrating as a fan, because
it doesn't feel fair.
It doesn't feel fair. And F1's not fair. Like we can all.
It's
not fair, not even in the slightest.
Yeah.
But it's just when you see certain like other drivers losing seats, or the risk of, we'll get into the whole Alpha Tauri situation and like that musical chairs of it all, and who's gonna lose out when I feel they're all deserving of a space. And then you have this situation going on with Lance. It just feels like, what are we doing here? Kind of thing. I don't know.
If it was Red Bull, he would have been gone 3 races ago.
Well, yeah. And if his father wasn't the owner of the team, I don't think he would be with them either. So
yeah.
But I do hope, he didn't obviously race today. So I hope he's doing okay. I feel like it was obviously physically he probably wasn't up for it, but I also think like mentally to take the race off was probably a good call.
I have zero criticisms of him not racing today.
Same.
It is the complete right decision.
I agree.
It's one of those things where you go, especially from a medical perspective.
Yes.
If you have had a crash like that and you think about how competitive these people are, and this is something which is really important, I think, when it comes to, for example, concussion assessments and stuff like that. There is a reason as to why there are rules in place that stop people from coming back on the field, going back out to play the following weekend, whatever else. And it's because if the decision is always in the athlete's hands, they will always race. They will always come back on the field. They will always do that despite what the doctor is telling them to do.
Exactly.
So this did sound like a combination of physical and then, of course, just that car is obviously like it's in bits.
Yeah.
It's not a car anymore.
No.
And so, but as soon as you have an athlete, and like I said, you think about how competitive they are, if they show an inch of doubt, it's not safe for them to drive anymore, because that doubt is going to carry with them and you're likely to see more mistakes. So I am actually really impressed by both Lance by saying, I'm not ready, and by the team for accepting that decision as well.
Yes. And we also got a few DMs from some people wondering why no one filled in. And just for people who don't know, a driver has to have at least one practice session, and qualifying does count as a practice session in order to race. So, they were not able to put anybody else in that car. But yeah, I mean, I do feel for Lance. I just ultimately, like, I want all of these drivers just to be like happy and to find, like, to be doing what they feel good doing. And I just don't sense the joy from Lance.
Yeah.
And, I hope that he either finds that joy again or is able to like figure out something that does make him happy, like playing tennis, maybe. Who knows? I did want to get into, so Max obviously struggled in qualified P11, but then there were all of the, things. I mean, how many things did he have to go to the stewards for? Like 3 different.
Oh yeah, like I've lost count.
The impeding for Yuki, some other thing in the pit lane. And he didn't get a penalty. Actually, I don't think anybody got a penalty. Which seemed a little bit unfair. People were comparing Max's incident, especially on Yuki, with I think Charles Leclerc and also Pierre at a race, and they both got penalties. Were you surprised?
Magnussen as well.
Yep, exactly. Were you surprised that they didn't give out a penalty? How did you feel about that?
Yeah. So one, I think the pit lane incident was bizarre.
It was weird.
Like, it was bizarre. And
I
then
agree.
you had those radio comments that came with it that just didn't sound legit. So I think that's bizarre. I think there should have been, even if there's a warning and it's kind of, we see what you did there, don't do it again. Because it's a bit of I think Bernie Collins was saying that is a bit of a gray area. She actually went and looked at all of the rules and was like, I can't actually see anything here that says that that's not okay. So he should have got a warning or something like that for that. But then, yeah, absolutely. When it came to, like you said, the precedent is there. Leclerc, Magnussen, Gasly, they all got 3-place grid drops. And so to me, I go, there are one of the biggest challenges we have with Formula One, and it's partially because tracks can be a bit different and that type of thing, but is consistency of rulebook application.
100%.
And this was one of those examples which just didn't sit right with me.
Yeah. And I saw some people talking about it on Twitter and saying, well, this track is known for having a lot of traffic, so they took that into account. And this is the issue I have, like, in other sports too, like American football or any other sport, where people will be like, it's at the end of the game and a ref will make a call and the commentators will be like, well, at this point in the game, it's the end of the game. You shouldn't let a call decide the end of the game. But I'm like, but if there was a penalty, then you call the penalty. It doesn't matter if it's the first half, second half, whenever it is. A penalty, or a foul is a foul, a penalty is a penalty. You can't just pick and choose when you make the call. And so I feel the same way about this. It's like, well, you can't be like, well, this this track is like this, so it's difficult, so we show more leniency, or this, that. It's like, well, either you have the rule or you don't.
Yeah.
And if you don't enforce it, or you enforce it at certain times but not other times, then what are we doing?
It's a really slippery slope.
Exactly.
If you compare it to like, even with the cost cap breach with Red
Yes.
Bull in 2021, as Toto said, he's like, well, if everybody knows that they're not going to enforce the cost cap, well, then everybody's just going to overspend. So if everybody knows that if you do something in the last minute of qualifying, or if you apply something after the race, well, then it doesn't matter. It's such a slippery slope, because the fact is that this is a sport of tenths and centimeters.
Yep.
So any opportunity to apply something in their favor, they'll take it. Of course they'll take it. That's what this is about. It's about figuring out how these tiny little technical adjustments or driving styles, whatever it might be, making it work for you in the best way possible. That's what this sport is about. So it's a very slippery slope if you are not consistent with how you police and apply penalties for various issues.
I completely agree. Just last little bit on qualifying. Obviously, Carlos Sainz got pole. We had a nice little battle there for pole between Carlos and George, and Charles was up in there. And I don't have a lot to say about it, other than it just, again, was nice to see other people. I know that Carlos got pole last week in Monza too, or a couple weeks ago, but it was just nice to see different people up there contending. I loved it.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. Again, like little moments like this where it's taking that kind of inevitability out of it, and all of a sudden we're left with the excitement again.
Exactly.
And that's just sport at its absolute finest. And I also think that it was something like, what was it? It was like less than 1/10 of a second covered the top three.
Yes.
Which is incredible. And interestingly, listening to Lando, he was like, I did not have 2/10 in me. Like that's all I had. And so what we saw really felt like this was the best pace on the day, and people who could put it together, make everything work. And that's what I like, when you feel like you're seeing the sport in its purest form.
Yeah.
That's when I get most excited about it.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
I loved it. So good. Okay, let's get to the race, because there's a lot to cover from the race as well. Just right off the bat, Yuki Tsunoda once again puncture, which was a little bit confusing, because I'm like, if you have a puncture, could you not get back to the pits? Could you not change your tires? Like, I was a little bit, I mean, maybe it was bad enough that he felt like he couldn't keep going. But I just feel gutted for Yuki, because it feels like, and maybe we can get into the conversation now or we can save it, but it just feels like with every passing week, it's so funny. The Daniel breaking his hand or whatever, you feel like in the moment, you're like, oh my God, this is terrible for Daniel. But in reality, it feels like it's more so been bad for Yuki. Like Liam's opportunity has almost, I think it's hurt Yuki the most, which is a weird thing to say, but it feels true.
I totally agree. I think as soon as Nick de Vries left,
yeah,
there was this kind of like light in especially the Australians' eyes, getting very excited about this. And that crash with Daniel could not have happened at a worse moment. But everyone thought that he would be the sorest loser. Now, I think he's the physically sorest loser from this situation. But you kind of go, all right, now Liam has that opportunity, but no one really thought about Yuki.
Right.
I think everyone and he's got his seat.
Yes.
And actually all of a sudden, and I think this is it's always going to be a challenging part about Formula One, but when you have somebody who has taken every opportunity of which he's had 3, and has made pretty serious statements in those 3, and I know it's not his fault, but being hampered by this kind of terrible misfortune, just a really unfortunate situation. And I do think that he is now at risk for his seat. However,
yeah, tell me what you think.
I think the driver lineup for Alpha Tauri next year will be Liam Lawson and Daniel Ricciardo. And I think that Yuki will have a seat, but it could be in Williams and it could be in Aston Martin, even though I don't think they're going to get rid of Stroll, but that's probably where he could go.
I agree with you. It does, because people have said this like before today when he scored points, and we should just say great job by Liam. Amazing. I mean, he's just doing what he needs to do in order to like succeed. He's not like making crazy overtakes. He's not like charging through the field, but he's just like staying his course. He's keeping it clean, and he's just like doing what he has to do, which is basically what he needs to do at this point. But even before this week, people were like, it's crazy that the guy who scored the only points for Alpha Tauri is the one that probably won't have a seat or is at risk. It just doesn't really make sense. But obviously when you look at the bigger picture, I agree. I feel like Daniel and Liam will have the seats. One, just because you can't not, I mean, the rebranding and everything, it's like you need a guy who's recognizable, has a, he brings along with him money essentially. And Liam doesn't quite yet. And also young guy, old guy. Well, I shouldn't say old. He is.
He's only a year older than me.
He is very young at heart and young, able-bodied.
Me too.
I'm almost 30. I turned 30 when this comes out the next day. So, no, he's experienced. Thank you. And I think that's a really nice balance. Because you have the guy that can help, fix the car. And I think people have even said like Alpha Tauri has been making some leaps, and people credit that to Daniel's feedback and what he said about the car when he got in the car, those 2 races before the break. And he can really help Liam develop, all those types of things. And Yuki just seems like the odd man out because I don't feel like he's ever been in Red Bull's plans for the future. I didn't even know this, but I saw an article this week that said Nick DeVries was the one that had the seat fitted for the Red Bull should Checo or Max have an issue, not Yuki. And it's like they've never really trusted Yuki. So
it's a tricky one. Like and then the thing is that he was so inconsistent and unpredictable, and he was somebody who kind of grappled with that kind of fight or flight reaction in difficult situations in his first year, which I think we can all give we probably agree that like rookies get a bit of a free shot in their first year.
Yep.
And he said he was surprised. I remember he said he was surprised when he got his contract renewed. He was like,
so
I think
funny.
he's going to get this. It's like, oh mate, don't say that to the public.
He's so
Where's
honest.
your PR? I love his honesty. I do appreciate that. But now going into a situation where he is meant to be the more experienced of the drivers. And I think the challenge for Yuki, right, and we're seeing this in Aston Martin, and we're actually seeing it kind of in Williams as well. You had somebody who everybody thought was out driving the car, is what everyone used to say about Yuki last year. But then they brought in Nick DeVries and he kind of dominated him a bit. But if your comparison point is somebody who is performing so much more poorly than you, you're going to look exceptional, right? It's the halo bias. So you look great because your friends are doing poorly. But then you bring in somebody who performs equal, if not better than you, and with less experience in that car and the team and everything else, all of a sudden it's all relative. Exactly. And so I think there is an element of him being a little bit exposed by his 2 most recent partners.
I completely agree. So you think there's a chance he could get the Williams seat?
I have big questions over Logan Sargent.
I do too.
Again, like I try not to be too critical of rookies, because it's just, there is so much to learn. I think as much as it's a very long season, so much goes on, and I think the year is probably kind of over before they know it. And it kind of reminds me when you do like an F45 class or something, and the first time you go through, I'm like, I don't know what's going on. And then the second time you're like, okay, I've got this. Now I can really push. And I kind of feel like that sometimes with rookies who aren't, some exceptional talent. But my question with Logan is whether he really should have been there in the first place. And the reason why I say that is his performance in Formula 2. He got put in over the likes of Liam Lawson, and you can kind of put Felipe Dragovich, Theo Pourchaire in the same boat. I didn't really feel right about it when he got put in then, and I don't really feel right about it now. And like I said, I'm reluctant to criticize too heavily in their first season. I think they should almost always get 2 years as a bit of a, standard. But I just question whether he should have been in there in the first place. And Williams have had that issue of somebody who's saying, they're getting the best, they're doing the best with what they can do. But then Albon shows up and makes the best a lot better.
Yep.
Which again, hard comparison point. This is somebody who has a lot of Red Bull insights and experience and this type of thing. And yeah, I don't want to throw someone out after their first year. I don't think it's right, but I just don't think he should have been there in the first place. So I question whether or not he should have a seat next year.
I agree. And I will have to say, I do have to say, a Alex Albon Yuki team would be pretty iconic. Because they are friends. They have a good relationship. They'd be funny together. So from I know the whole American thing, and people make a big deal about, oh, well, it's nice to have an American driver on the grid. And I push back as an American, America's favorite driver in general is Daniel Ricciardo. It's not, I don't think you need an American to bring in an American audience. You need a fun, vibrant personality that's likable to bring people in. That's, not that Logan's not seems like a nice guy, but I don't think he doesn't have the whatever it is that Daniel has.
Charisma. Yeah.
To put it simply. I would love to see Yuki with Fernando, because I also feel like that would be an iconic duo for a different reason. Just again, more chaos. It just seems, I just can't imagine Yuki not being on the grid next year. It just seems like he's much better than a decent chunk of the grid. But then again, it's like, I cannot argue against Liam. I definitely think Liam has a seat. I don't know how, in what world you don't give him the seat next year. And I think Daniel has it as well.
Or you could see Liam go to Williams, for example, as well.
Yeah.
So, and Yuki stays where he is.
That's true.
And, you get Yuki stays where he is. Daniel goes in. Liam goes to Williams, and Checo stays where he is as well, which is a weird conversation to have. That's a whole nother discussion. But yeah, that's another alternative. I think you're right though. He's definitely, and the thing is, but he's racing as though there's no tomorrow. And as much as, like you said, he's not being stupid with it, in that he's not making high risk moves or anything like that. And you saw him with his battle with Max today, for example. Didn't just let him pass, but recognized when he was like, I don't have the pace here. And so didn't fight that fight for no reason, So I think he situations like that, he's shown his racecraft to the extent that he needs to, but hasn't taken unnecessary risks. I think that's smart, but he doesn't even know if he'll ever race again, So he's just going, I'm taking every opportunity as it presents, putting my best foot forward and working with what I've got, doing the best I can. And there's something very pure about that, or simple about that. Do you know what I mean? Simple. In terms of going, it just takes a lot of complexity out of it, which I think sometimes works to your benefit if you can just keep it simple.
I completely agree. Yeah. So a lot left to see and find out. And I'm curious when they'll make that decision about who has the seats. I think it will be once Daniel comes back, but who knows?
Great.
So back to the race. Yuki obviously has his issue. Not a ton happened until, I believe it was Logan Sargent, who hit the wall. His front wing he had some damage. Safety car comes out. And that really starts the chaos. You have a lot of cars pitting. The Red Bulls don't. And I feel like that's when the race picked up for me. It was like, okay, now we're in it. Now stuff's going on. Now stuff's happening.
Yeah, it was interesting because we had a few people kind of yawning, kind of going, oh, please don't let this just be a simple race.
Yeah.
Ferrari were totally controlling that first third of the race, because anyone who pitted before them would have been spat out in terrible positions.
Yep.
So there was a kind of very high risk, low reward for being the first to pit, but that also could have been triggered by the back. But at the same time, Ferrari were in complete control. Like you said, then Sargent kind of let the race open up in that way. And everyone except for the Red Bulls and Valtteri Bottas pitted. And then we had Ferrari,
I know,
who had to hold Leclerc for traffic. What a disaster.
I
It wasn't
know.
great for Hulkenberg either. The double stack, it's very hard to pull off.
It's so hard.
He lost 3 places through theirs as well. But what was your reaction to the Ferrari?
Yeah, it's no surprise that I like Carlos Sainz a lot. I'm a Carlos fan, but I am a Charles Leclerc. He's one of my absolute favorites. And it feels like it's never ending for Charles. The sort of issues, the self-inflicted wounds, not on his part, but on the part of Ferrari. And I think in general, it was always going to be like Carlos was going to have the preferred strategy. Carlos was going to be the one that they favor, just given his position and that he got pole. And Charles, I think even the Mercedes, they said to George that they were going to sacrifice Leclerc. Like that was their plan. He is the sacrificial lamb. So it was less like anger. It was more just like, of course, another day as a Charles Leclerc fan.
100%. And so I suppose what we lacked in the inevitability of Red Bull dominance, we got it in the Leclerc bad luck situation.
Exactly. That will never die. That will never, ever, ever end as long as we have him in the Ferrari seat. And then, I mean, there was a lot of DNFs. You had Esteban, which, happy birthday, Esteban, but also sad birthday for you. The Alpines, man, I mean, it is just like a gamble whether they're going to make it through the race.
That's like, it's been like that for a couple of years. So I think we've got so many races in every season now. Sometimes I can't remember if a race was actually like this year or last year. It seems so long ago.
Yeah.
But that Alpine Renault reliability has been an issue for ages, and they came into 2023 going, nah, we've got it sorted and everything else. 2 double DNFs later, don't think you do. Think you do. It is just, imagine going into a race and going, I know that I have the racecraft and the ability to make good moves and to defend and to overtake and this, that, and the other. And our pure pace is acceptable, but I just don't know if my car is going to make it through. Like that must just be, not having the trust in your vehicle must just be awful.
Yeah. I think every driver obviously assumes they understand that there's a chance they might have a DNF here or there throughout the season, whether it's an engine issue, whatever, right? Like that, you just expect that. But Alpine, I mean, I don't know. I don't have the numbers as to how many DNFs they've had this season
6
combined.
6 or 7.
It's just not great. And I mean, Esteban, didn't he DNF in Monza? He DNF'd in Monza, right?
Yeah. So they've, I think it's 6 or 7 in total. I don't have it in front of me, but just a terrible season for them.
Terrible. And then you have Mercedes decide to pit again, taking the gamble, going on the mediums. I was slightly shocked that they both decided to go for that strategy. I mean, I think it worked sort of. But it was a bit of a risk. But it paid off for us as viewers because the racing at the end was incredible. I was at the edge of my seat. I couldn't believe
yelling. I was yelling.
Yes. 4 cars all within DRS range fighting for essentially the win. I mean, it was so incredible. Though I did feel like with Lewis right on George's tail, part of me was like, Lewis either needs to completely back off or he needs to, like, it seemed like they were kind of, I don't know. I wonder, does Lewis actually have the pace to like take on Lando? Is this hurting Mercedes rather than helping them?
Yeah, I think they are going to have a really interesting situation on their hands over the next 2 years, because I think in George's rookie season, he was probably okay to kind of say, I'm going to learn as much as I can from this multiple world champion. I'll kind of accept my role as junior driver in a certain way and just kind of be a sponge, as well as kind of, processing my thoughts and ideas at the same time. Now we're in a position where he's going, I've got the same pace as you, and I'm now here to win. I'm not the junior burger of the team. And I I expect to have as much preferential treatment as my teammate. So whilst I don't think we're going to have a full Hamilton Rosberg
Yeah.
situation on our hands, because
Yeah.
I think Russell is a very different personality to Nico. At the same time, there's going to have to be some very clear communication within the team about, and I think some of it comes down to planning in terms of going, if A happens, we do X. If B happens, we do Y. If C happens, we do Z, like that type of thing, so that they can try and make sure that they can be as clear as possible about, you know, when you can race and how much you can race. And, you know, we see with the McLarens last week, example, or the last race, race, but no contact, you know. And I think in this situation, it was really interesting because you will never really know if Hamilton had truly had the pace as he said that he did. I think he probably did, actually.
I think so too.
I think he did. And I think if it hadn't been for not just George's incident, but if we had, for example, one more lap, if they hadn't changed the track and we had longer laps, then, you know, maybe we would have seen Hamilton make his way through. But I think they're going to have a really interesting situation on their hands the next couple of years with managing those two.
Right. And that's also why I was sort of surprised they went on the same strategy, because you're sort of asking for there to be problems, not problems, but and obviously George then hit the wall, which I felt really bad for George. That was just, again, another driver who's just had some bad luck this season and just has been in positions to do well and then has just had an unfortunate experience. And
I think I think George's crash in the race was actually very similar situation as Stroll in qualifying, in that you have this driver who is pushing so hard, and you only have to have 1 second, not even that, a tenth of a second, where you are either looking at the car in front of you instead of your line, or whatever it is, that tiny little lapse in, it might not even have been focus as much as judgment in the extent to which you push. And I actually think they're very similar. And the thing with Stroll yesterday is that his lap was not good. Like, it was a slow lap. And then he tried to get as much out of the last couple of corners as you could. You can't make up that kind of time in 2 corners.
Right.
So yesterday I actually think was really poor judgment from Stroll, because you can't, he said, I was trying to push really hard to make up as much time as I could in the last couple of corners to get through to Q2. It was like, you can't make up that type of time in 2 corners. That's poor judgment. And I think today's was like, whilst not quite the same situation, obviously, especially under race conditions, it is that when you are right on the limit, that's all it takes. And Lando had done something very similar in the same spot. It's just that, you know, gosh, just these tiny little variables in seconds of seconds.
Yeah, I think that's one of George's, you know, I don't want to say it's a weakness, but it's something that I think will get better at as he gets more experience. But he does tend to push a little too hard. He tries to go for it a little bit more. He's just a little bit overeager, and which is understandable when you can see a race win right in front of your face. You know, it's right there. But I think a more experienced driver wouldn't maybe make quite the same mistake. But anyway, Lewis ended up getting P3. Didn't seem particularly like I think he kind of felt like he didn't earn the third. I think he felt like it was kind of like, I think he was maybe a little bit upset about not being able to get past George and that whole situation. And then also George kind of gifted him the podium. But we have to talk about Carlos being a genius and giving Lando DRS so that Lando could defend against George, which then protected Carlos and his race win. And it is Virgo season. I am a Virgo, and that is peak Virgo energy, brain working, you know, going into overtime, thinking about how can I protect myself and keep keep this win. And I just loved how he told his race engineer, he's like, yeah, this is on purpose.
Duh. It almost felt like when his race engineer said, he's got DRS now, I almost it was as good as him just being like, duh. Like,
exactly.
That's deliberate. Like, can they just make him head strategist at Ferrari already? He's been doing this for races on end now, where he's the one making the calls, and seems to be in total control, 80% of the time. And when he is in control, he does seem to get better outcomes in comparison to leaning on the team for their strategy decisions.
Exactly.
So clever. But I also think that's a bit of a story of like this whole race was a bit like that, in that it was a bit of a, go slowly to go fast, if that makes sense. There were lots of moments like that. And, with Max, for example, pushing too hard, and they said, you need to back off in order to make these hard tires because he's on them at the start to run deep. So there were lots of drivers like that, and little moments where they decided to either not push as hard in order to play the long game and that type of thing. And this was one of those examples where it's like, I'm going to let you into this time space in order to help my own game. And yes, it's going to help you secure P2 as well, but it's this feels a bit nonsensical when you look at it. You have to go slow to go fast sometimes, and he was in complete control.
Yeah, it was awesome. Yeah, it was awesome to see. And that is like another big difference. We've said this before, between Carlos and Charles. It's just their personality. Carlos is always thinking ahead. He's thinking strategy. He's thinking, what can I do? Sort of like a chess master, whereas Charles is very reactive. He's thinking 1 second ahead. He's not thinking long term, which helps him in some ways, but also in certain situations can hurt him as well. So I was happy for Carlos. He's had a really good post summer break performance. I feel like he is like just riding high on confidence, and just seems to be in a really great place with that car, which is fun to see.
Yeah, completely agree. This is such a sport of momentum, right?
Exactly.
And success breeds confidence. And so, I know that doesn't always work out that way, but you see it more often than not, where you just need a couple of confidence boosting weekends, and you get that momentum, and then it's, you're on that train, and it tends to be things that are outside of your control that derail you. So I'm absolutely here for it. I'm probably more of a Carlos fan than a Charles fan.
Okay.
So, and that goes back to probably Renault days. I loved him when he was with Daniel, and I kind of just have been a big fan of his, and I like his style as well, and just in terms of how he goes about his weekends and that type of thing. So I was absolutely stoked for him. And I also think there's probably an element of the underdog kind of thing. Like he kind of comes across as the perceived kind of like poorer cousin with Golden Boy Leclerc sometimes.
100%.
And so there's definitely a part of me that kind of just really likes to rally for the underdog, because he's not, in my view, he's not. And I also think that he will have had to work really hard to not let himself just accept that role within the team, if that makes sense. When everyone around you is kind of talking about how your teammate is a world champion driver, just needs the car underneath him and this, that, and the other, it'd be so easy to kind of just become one with that perception, but instead of fighting it. And I think that's one of the other things that really impresses me about him.
Totally agree. Anything else to go over during the race before we get into our pyramid?
I don't think so. I mean, I could talk about this all day, and I won't. But probably the one other thing I would say just on Mercedes was how much planning went into their whole weekend, because they were the only team left with those fresh mediums. So it was really interesting, because a lot of people were like, McLarens don't want to give up track position. That's why. So with the virtual safety car, when that came in to move Ocon's car,
right?
Like, they don't want to give up track position. That's interesting. This and the other. I was like, they don't have any tires.
Right.
You've still got 25 or so laps to go, and your softs are not going to go that far.
Exactly.
So they can't. So that was very much a trick that Mercedes had up their sleeve. And I think that's where I think when we talk about race debriefs and that type of thing, you've got to look at the weekend as a whole, because when you look at little moments like that, it's easy to look at them in isolation. But then you've got to look at the whole weekend and that tire management, not just in the race, but over the whole weekend, and worked for them here.
Yeah, it was great. I mean, didn't work for George ultimately, but
yeah,
but that's a good idea. It was a good idea. Okay, let's get to our pyramid, which, is, I feel, pretty self-explanatory, but we'll go through anyway. So at the bottom of the pyramid this week, we have, unfortunately, Mr. Lance Stroll, but as you mentioned, it's really Aston Martin as a whole, because Fernando also had a pretty shit weekend.
Yep. Agreed. Like you said, it's pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah, it was. I mean, Fernando was getting penalties, was the terrible pit stop, it was just not a great weekend.
He had that spin as well.
Exactly.
And yeah, Fernando coming last was not on my bingo card.
Nope, not at all. Not at all. Next we have Esteban Ocon, also Alpine for the reliability, though we do have to give a shout out to Pierre. I think he got P6, which is a pretty decent performance, but just the constant DNFs is just a problem they're going to have to fix.
I completely agree. We do have to isolate Pierre in that he qualified 12th, finished in 6th. Making up 6 places is not an easy feat here, so hats off to him. But that the reliability is they've got to sort it out. Like especially if you think about the pace that they do have when it works, but this seems to be a pretty systemic issue. And so, you just can't be having that double DNFs, walking away with no points at more than one weekend. Like, that's just
not good.
You can't be doing that.
No,
absolutely. Definitely bottom of the pyramid.
And then the last bottom place, which is something I never thought that we'd say this season, but it is Red Bull. Just a pretty bad weekend. I think Max, he came in 5th? Is that right? So, did decently well to make up some space, some places. Checo, I mean, he was kind of punting people left and right. He caused the Yuki DNF. He, I think, hit Alex. It wasn't a great weekend for Checo, a guy who does very well on street circuits, but just was not having a great time this weekend. And I feel a little bit of joy putting Red Bull in this bottom spot, because not because I hate them or anything like that, but because it's just nice to see someone that's done so well for so long have just not a great weekend.
Like you said, I think and a part of that comes to that underdog kind of psychology side of things, right?
Exactly.
Everyone's kind of secretly hoping. I was really in two minds when it comes to Red Bull once they really started dominating this season. Part of me was like, this is going to be boring. But the other part of me was like, this is history making. To have a team, if they had, and of course this rules out the potential that they would win every race this season. I kind of did want them to do that purely because that is incredible when it comes to history. Like that's astonishing. What we're seeing is, in this type of epic dominance, no one else has done that, won every race in a season. So there was part of me that kind of said, I do hope they achieve that. But I am with you as well in terms of just it made for so much more of an exciting weekend. But the whole of Red Bull is in the bottom of the pyramid as well because of Helmut Marko as well. His comments. And as much as Christian will like to say that he's not actually a Red Bull employee, you are not winning this fight on semantics, Mr. Horner. And also stop saying that he's from South America.
I know.
His actual penalty. So I'm giving a penalty to Helmut Marko, and it's a year 7 geography class.
Exactly.
Filled with year 7 boys.
Exactly. Yeah. He just, the grave that he keeps digging for himself, and it is interesting. We got some people that message us like, why are they keeping him around? Like, he not only puts his foot in his mouth, I mean, not only says things that are blatantly racist a lot, frequently, but he also just runs his mouth a lot, just very in ways that are not necessarily offensive, but it's just why do you need this guy around? I mean, obviously he's the developmental, sort of guru and finds these up and coming drivers. But like, if we are seeing what's going on with the Red Bull Junior program, it's not like there's a lot happening at the moment. So I just don't really understand the need to like keep him around when he's kind of a PR disaster.
And not just for PR, but for his team. Like he
Yes.
frequently throws his
100%.
own drivers under the bus. And I'm like, what is that doing for the confidence of your drivers who are then on track? Like, you are doing your team a disservice by knocking the confidence of your drivers. Like, anybody who has read Leadership 101,
yeah,
do you know what? Not even Leadership, Management 101. Don't throw your team under the bus in public situations. They will not perform better.
no.
Like, and like you said, I think his the positive effects for the team now are waning in terms of that developmental eye and, you know, programming or whatever that he was known as being his kind of guru prophet for. Yeah, the Red Bull development program is kind of in shambles. And so, yeah, you know, pros and cons. Currently, cons list is a hell of a lot longer.
Yeah, I agree. And it also frustrated me too. I don't know if you noticed this. It seemed to me like Lewis was the only non-Red Bull driver asked about the helmet Marco comments. And it's like, why does Lewis have to continuously be like the only person to like talk about or speak out about issues that are, you know, bigger than F1 and deal with like human rights activities or just like being a decent human being? And yeah, it just, that kind of frustrated me too. It's like, why are we singling out Lewis to have to answer?
It's that classic issue of, whilst I know these comments weren't about him, it was about somebody's race, essentially.
Yes.
And so then they go to Lewis, and it's that classic thing of stop making victims be the ones to fight their cause. So go and get a white British driver to talk about how this is not okay. Stop making the victims of, whether it's oppression, racism, all of these, you know, behaviors, be the ones to have to talk about it. Like, go and speak. Yeah. That's something, again, that's also a whole nother episode.
I know. And I did see Toto Wolff did talk about it, which was good. But like, it just, that was kind of a little bit frustrating.
Agreed.
For me. But anyway, we'll move on to the mid spot of the pyramid, middle of the pack. We decided on George, even though ultimately the race, it was bad. He didn't get points, but he did qualify P2. He was in the hunt for the win. Everything was great except for the ultimate outcome. So in that way, I feel like if with time, I think he'll be able to look back on it and be like, you know what, I actually had a good weekend despite the result.
Yeah, they kind of just can't. We put them in the middle because he kind of cancelled each other out, right?
Yes.
His good performance cancelled out the outcome, and so you're left in the middle. So that's just where he is. But he must just be distraught. But
I know,
especially because like in those situations, often we're looking for someone else to blame. We're looking for, you know, it wasn't a puncture, it wasn't this, it was human error, and that's really just takes a bit of time to come to terms with.
Exactly.
So
yeah, I completely agree. And then the next spot we have, and you came up with this one, which was just basically all of the traffic impeding issues, just I don't know how long the stewards had to discuss and talk post qualifying. But it made for an entertaining experience. Wasn't necessarily, I don't know that it was handled properly.
They just need to figure out these rules about traffic, and they've tried to address it in Monza. They trialed like the limitations around having a slow out lap. But the problem is that it's just so dangerous. Like,
I know,
watch those cars all backing up, and then Logan Sargent comes through on his flying lap, just gets around them. And then you had Max's behavior, and he was like, it's physically dangerous because of the situation that it creates, but it also puts drivers in a really weird mindset, being like, can I go? I don't know. They're questioning themselves. And then they have to snap into, you're on a flying lap now. And it's pure concentration. So I think from a like safety perspective, it's something that it's worse at some tracks than others. This one had, especially once they've made those track changes, it's a really short track.
Yep.
So that is going to make the traffic more of an issue when you just don't have those really long tracks. But so yeah, that middle of the pyramid is because they haven't quite figured it out. It's not an issue all the time, but it's an issue some of the time. And it's making a lot of work for the marshals. And it's not contributing to a safe racing environment.
Completely agree. And we shouldn't wait for something really bad to happen to like make a change.
Yeah, yes, it was really scary actually. It was no good.
And then top of the pyramid, which is should be very obvious, but it's Carlos Sainz getting pole position, winning the race, being a genius, strategy mastermind. We have to just, tip our cap to him. And I mean, there was really no one else that came close, in my opinion.
No, I completely agree. And I just really appreciated his confidence and the control that he had the whole weekend. He didn't have that sense of plan A, plan B, like what are we doing?
Right. Exactly.
There just didn't seem to be any ambiguity. And I think it's just really important for a driver like Carlos to be able to show not just that I can make good overtakes and this, that, and the other, but I can control a race. Because that is something we don't get to see very often because Max is always at the front. And it's a skill that's very hard to prove. And I just think he did a really great job of it, showing that I don't just have good racecraft, but I know how to win. I think he made a real impact. Yeah. So absolutely top of the pyramid for sure.
Loved it. Okay, let's get to our fan and foe. And then we'll just end on a brief few listener questions. Would you like to start? We'll start with our foes, end on a high note. Would you like to share your foe?
My foe is Yuki's car, which has decided that it doesn't want a Grand Prix anymore.
That's so funny. Mine is Yuki having the worst luck known to mankind.
That car is like, no, thank you.
I'm telling you, it's like there's some, I don't know what it is. It's like, you guys know, Daniel's the one who's not racing. It wasn't that, it seems like there was some weird, like, I don't know, hex put on him. It was like, Daniel can't race, neither can you, Yuki.
Oh, that just
so bad.
But you were also you were really right in that, in terms of saying it was interesting how quickly he decided that his race was done. But I also think that could have been, he managed to get it off the track really quickly, so it didn't disrupt the race. So I think that was, to everybody else's benefit, that he didn't try and limp back to the pits, probably with a tire shredding and, no good.
Yuki's the real hero here. No, he, I think about him sometimes, like, I'm like, oh, what's he going to do if he doesn't have F1? I think we can feel pretty confident that even if Yuki is not in F1, he is going to be just fine. He is going to he has many passions, other things he's interested in. He's going to be great. It's not even his dream to be an F1 champion. His dream is to open a restaurant. Like, he has other aspirations. He's going to be okay. I'm
going to be funding the basically extracurricular activities, and therefore the revenue for all of these ex Formula One drivers when their time comes. Like, the amount of Daniel Ricciardo merch I own from his lines is ridiculous, especially when I have 2 hoodies and track pants and I live in a tropical environment. I don't need them. I have 2 pairs of big socks, barely wear them. So funding his non-racing time career, and then I will go and eat all of Yuki's food, because I think it will be exceptional. I love Japanese, and so I will happily fund his career as well. next trip for all of us will be to Yuki's restaurant, wherever it is in the world, whatever kind of food, whatever, we will go. We will proudly support. And he's going to be okay. I do have this thing. I do kind of want to see Yuki in IndyCar. I think it would be absolutely iconic. Yuki on an oval. Iconic for him. I think he would. I think he would truly be the ultimate fan favorite. I think people would love him in IndyCar. Like, oh, that's such a. It would be iconic. Yeah. Totally agree. But there is something very terrifying about Yuki on an oval. I don't know. Just, I think he might become a little bit unhinged.
It'd be fun to see. Okay, fan. What is your fan?
Can I cheat? And can I pick two fans?
You can.
So I have two. One is a serious one. One is kind of just a fun moment.
Okay.
My first one, I'm going to go with the serious one, which is the hands device, which when Lance's crash yesterday, when you looked at the momentum that his head was moving around at in that car, it's awful to see. And it's been a major cause of death in motorsport, not just in Formula One. We've lost a couple of Formula One drivers to that injury where you have this basilar skull fracture. And then they invented this device. Like every other safety device, there was resistance. No one wanted it. Dale Earnhardt over in car used to call it like a noose. He was really worried that it would kind of perform in a way that it wasn't intended. And he refused to use it and stuff. And he then actually died from that injury, which was obviously devastating. But it was that fatality that then basically got the momentum for this device being tested properly under different G-forces and conditions. Mercedes tested it like for years. I think it's around the late 90s. And then they shared all of their research data with the FIA. And it took a couple of years. Many categories adopted it over the next couple of years, but it wasn't until 2009 that the FIA basically made it compulsory for all international level events. And when you see a crash like yesterday, this device, which limits the front and then back force of the head, it's literally saves lives, like the halo, which we now all, praise. To me, my fan is that because it potentially, we don't know, obviously, but it potentially saved a life yesterday. And the fact that we don't know is a good thing. And so thanks to the engineers back in the, late 80s who developed that, and then people who rallied to implement it, they're also my fan. They're also my fans of the week. So
I love that.
Incredible development that saves lives and allows us to see great racing as well. So that's my one. And my other one is actually Carlos Sainz Sr. So he's over in Sardinia this weekend for Extreme E.
Okay.
And he was watching remotely because he's obviously has a team over in Extreme E, and he was watching remotely Carlos's qualifying. So they're all slapping each other on the back, getting excited because he then got pole. And then within 15 minutes, he had to go into the control center to watch his Extreme E team in the final for round 7 of Extreme E, which they then won. And within 10 minutes later, he was on the podium and celebrating over in Sardinia. So two things, just like what a basically 30 minutes of your life, just watching this kind of series of excitement and celebrations I loved. But also as a dad, like these are his babies.
Yeah,
he's got
exactly.
his Extreme E team. He's got Carlos, he's like, I was like, and to see them all be so successful in the space of 30 minutes, what a wild ride for him. But he's my other fan for today is Carlos Sainz Sr.
I love that. You picked ones that are very, they weren't the obvious ones, which I appreciate from you, because mine is very obvious, which is that we got a non-Red Bull victory, which is low-hanging fruit. But I mean, it's the truth. I didn't think we would get a full season of Red Bull because it's never happened. And I couldn't imagine it happening. I thought at least one team would get a win, but then for it to actually happen, I'm just, I don't know. It's just a fun thing to see someone else get the victory. Okay. Just a couple of quick, I asked the listeners just for some questions, comments, concerns, and this is funny. They said, so I'm sure you saw Alex Albon has a new shoe that he's sharing. And someone said, Albon's shoes seem to be cursed. Albon missed out on points. Yuki wore the shoes, he DNF'd, and Fernando wore the shoes and had the worst day ever. So word of advice to any drivers in the future, maybe don't wear the Alex Albon shoes.
Something in that. There's something in that. They reminded me of Etnies. Did you wear Etnies?
Oh, I didn't wear them, but I know what you're talking about for sure.
Yeah.
Yes, I can see
the
that.
shape and stuff really reminded me of those. And I was like, I love Albon, and I like that he's got some different merch.
Yep.
But they remind me of Etnies, and that's not a pastime I need to relive.
No. And then a lot of people, I mean, we talked about this a lot, but just like what's going to happen to Yuki, Liam, Daniel. And one person did ask, do we think there's a chance that they will not, I mean, they didn't word it this way, but how I'm taking it is like, with Daniel coming back, is there a chance he would come back in place of Yuki and not of, like, with Liam getting points and doing so well, do they want to like take him out of that seat this season?
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. I don't think so. Partially because he's under contract, and partially because I just don't think you want that type of rocking the boat when you've got 7 races to go. I don't see the point in making that change. Like, and for what, a couple of points here and there, they would probably get more out of him from a development perspective than they would with points anyway. So interesting question. I don't think so.
It is weird to think like, okay, Daniel's going to come back and then they're going to take out the guy that like, and we don't know how he's going to do in Suzuka, but like to take out a guy that's scoring points just doesn't make like, again, you can't like wrap your head around it.
He's not performing poorly enough.
Yes, I completely agree. And again, it's another chance. Again, this is like an experimental year for Alpha Tauri, Red Bull, to be like, okay, Yuki and Daniel. Okay, now Yuki and Liam. Back with Daniel to kind of compare and contrast. So I think it would be funny though if they put Daniel and Liam to be like, okay, well now let's try this version of the lineup. Like we've tried Yuki, Daniel, like Yuki,
speed
Liam.
Dating.
Let's try Daniel, Liam, and let's see how that goes. Yeah, exactly. Speed. Yeah. But what a crazy season for them, for Alpha Tauri. It is quite.
They're making up for the lack of craziness in the kind of driver market season,
exactly.
Like silly season. They're just making up for the entire paddock within one team.
Exactly. Okay, my last question for you, which is a question that we try to ask all of our F1 guests that come on the show. If you were going to an F1 dinner party, okay, and it's you, 3 drivers, and 1 principal, who are you inviting to this dinner party?
Ooh, that's the current drivers?
Current drivers, current principal.
Okay, so current drivers, got to think about the dynamic.
Very important.
I'm going to go for... Oh, am I? Yeah, I'm going to go for... I'm going to go for Alex Albon.
Okay.
Carlos Sainz and Daniel Ricciardo, because I'm counting him as a current driver.
Yeah, for sure.
Because I think like Alex is just lovely. He's always going to have fun. He's going to be a kind, vibrant person to have around. Yes. Daniel's going to bring the mischief.
Mm-hmm.
And then Carlos is going to just go like full Spanish, bring some like kind of great spicy vibes with his chili hat. And I think we'll kind of bounce off the other 2. And also I just need to look at that hair in real life.
100%.
So that's the actual reason. So yeah, they would be my 3 drivers, and then a team principal. I think it's got to be Gunther, doesn't it? Like it has to be.
Yeah. I mean, it's a different, like whether you put him in, you do Toto, but it changes the dynamic of what and with Gunther, it's going to be funny and fun. You're going to have, it's going to be light and fun and not super serious, which is what you want at a dinner party. You don't want to get so deep,
And I think he again would just bring a different kind of cultural dynamic as well. He will bounce off Daniel Ricciardo very well.
For sure.
I think that would be a great vibe. And he would have some great stories as well. I think he would have some really exceptional stories to tell. Yeah, that's
I completely agree. I love it. I want to attend that dinner with you as well. Thank you so much for being on, for filling in for Hannah. I appreciate it more than you know. Please let everybody know where they can find you, listen to you, hear your beautiful voice.
Thank you. No, thank you for having me. It's been lovely. It's been great fun. I love that, we have these connections where we've, met up at different races or whatever else and then get to work together. And so it's like, I think it's awesome. I love it.
It's great.
So yeah, lots of fun. Thank you for having me. I hope that Hannah's having a great weekend. In terms of where to find us. So for me, I'm Freya.Brolsma. It's my handle on Instagram, and our podcast is Lakeside Drive. Lakeside Drive is on all platforms, wherever you get your podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, etc. We're on YouTube as well. Yes. Yeah, and Lakeside Drive, because a few people who are not Australian wonder why we have that name, and that is the fastest part of the Albert Park track is called Lakeside Drive, which we drive around because it's the street track all the time. So yeah, that's the part of the Albert Park track. So that's our namesake.
I love it. I love it so much. Okay. I don't know if you know how we end the show, but I would love it. So we end the show by saying enchanté. We go enchanté. And I would love it if you would do us the honor of giving us an enchanté to wrap it up. Do you feel comfortable?
Happily.
Okay.
Happily.
Whenever you're ready.
Okay. Enchanté.
Love it. Thank you.